Hello, and welcome back to most of you, and welcome to some of you to day 2 of the Democracy Solutions Summit. My name is Tamaya Dennard, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being a member of the Represent Women team. I serve as one of the program and partnerships managers, and I have the honor of being your MC today. We have another amazing slate of women experts for day 2 of the summit. I'm excited to also let you know that our closing speaker today will be none other than Stacey Abrams. Are you kidding me? I said Stacey Abrams. I'm sure some of you heard the speech last night and heard she was mentioned, so we'll see how that goes today. As a quick note, I want to make sure that all of you know that the event today is being recorded and will be posted on our website soon. And if you are in need of closed captions, those are available on your Zoom menu. For those of you who are new to DSS, it is a very unique space. It is the only democracy reform summit that features exclusively women identifying people. Our executive director, Cynthia, if you don't know who she is, you should know, but she will forget more about democracy reform than most of us will ever know. And Cynthia grew tired of going to summits and attending conferences that only highlighted men. So true to form, Cynthia stopped asking for a seat at the table and created her own, and here we are. Here at Represent Women, we are encouraged to focus on reforms and policies that help women to run, win, lead, and serve. We hope that DSS inspires you to bring these transformative policies to your respective communities. Without further ado, I would like to discuss what we have planned for you today. Our speakers for the day will be highlighting the solutions to build a more representative democracy at the state level. Yesterday, we talked about the local level. Today, it's about the state. Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, who was scheduled to give the opening remarks today, is unfortunately unwell and will no longer be able to join us. We are thankful for the work that she's doing in New Mexico, and we wish her a speedy recovery. We would like to take this time instead to share with all of you the Represent Women's cornerstone research and programs. I am excited to introduce my colleague, Alyssa Bombardier-Shaw, who is our Operations and Development Manager, Victoria Pelletier, who is I'll call her my cohort in the program and partnerships team. She's the other manager. And Fatma Taufik, who is our international research manager. And they're going to share more about our Gender Parity Index, the Women's Power Collaborative, and our latest research release, the North American Country Brief. Alyssa, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Tamaya. It's such an honor to be here with you all today and to have been able to plan this summit. I've loved every minute of it, so thank you all so much for being here. My name is Alyssa Bombardier-Shaw. I'm our Operations and Development Manager, and I'm going to be talking to you first about the Gender Parity Index. So the Gender Parity Index, you might have seen if you were here yesterday, we shared a little bit about that. And with it being the state level day, we were excited to talk about, even though the Gender Parity Index looks at all 50 states, we actually look at the local, state, and federal level for the status of women's representation in every state. And so it's super exciting to be able to see over the last 11 or so years that we've done this report, the progress that we've been making. And while we are seeing progress, something that this report has highlighted is that this progress is slow and it is not consistent. The majority of states actually receive a D letter grade in this year and all years past for the Gender Parity Index. And so it really highlights the need and for the work that we do here at Represent Women, which is on systemic reform. We know that as more women are running for office, which is such an important piece of the puzzle, we also need to be reforming our system so that they're not consistently facing barriers throughout their time in office, whether they're running, winning their elections, serving in office, or trying to elevate themselves into higher leadership positions. And so the Gender Parity Index is really an essential piece to understand why we need the systemic reform. We are able to see progress when we have these reforms that are actually transforming the political environment for everybody. So I definitely recommend that you take a second to, I think the link was shared in the chat, read through the report, check out how your state is doing. We look at, again, like I said, the federal, state executive, state legislature, and the local level. And there's lots of really great information about what your state can do to help increase its Gender Parity Index score. So that's a really short overview. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Victoria.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Happy Democracy Solutions Summit Day 2. My name is Victoria Pelletier, and I'm the Programs and Partnerships Manager at Represent Women. And if during yesterday's session you got a little sad when you realized we only have 2 days left of the Democracy Solution Summit, and you thought to yourself, I wish I had an opportunity to talk about women's representation and democracy reform on a more frequent basis, you are in luck because the Women's Power Collaborative, we talk about all of this all the time and every single month especially. So the Women's Power Collaborative is the only national level platform of its kind that brings together women's representation advocates, democracy reform experts, elected officials, academics, researchers, and passionate supporters, all under one virtual roof with one goal, which is building women's political power. And it's completely free to join. And when you join, you get access to our regional group meetings, which are meetings that we have every month that give you a chance to get to meet people in your state or in neighboring states that do similar work towards representation. You will get access to research. Some of it is ours, Represent Women. Some of it is our partners, partner organizations, as well as candidate training manuals and briefs and handouts and so much more. You also get to attend our monthly Lunch and Learns, where we hear from experts who are doing incredible work to build women's representation. We have one happening at the end of the month. I know Erin Velarde started us out yesterday, CEO and founder of Vote Run Lead Action. Vote Run Lead Action will be presenting a Lunch and Learn at the end of the month, so you definitely don't want to miss that. And we get to hear from incredible experts that are doing work to build women's representation, and you get a one-stop shop for networking and collaboration and community, which is crucial right now as we fight for our democracy. We are also hosting a Democracy Solution Summit after hours on Tuesday, March 25th at 4 p.m. for a more intimate conversation with the Represent Women staff, with panelists, and with all of you in attendance. So if you're here today and joining us tomorrow, and you have a question that didn't get answered, or you just want a chance to dive a little bit deeper into these discussions and conversations, then join us on the 25th, join the Women's Power Collaborative, and join the movement towards building women's representation. Whether you've been working in this world for years or you're new, whether you're an elected official or just a passionate supporter, and you just want to be part of this network, we would love to have you. I always say this, the only prerequisite that there is to join is that you care about women, you care about women's representation. So we'd love to have you join us. I know there's a link in the chat. Again, completely free to join, and we look forward to seeing you there. So thank you so much, and I will pass the mic to my colleague Fatma to talk about Represent Women's new North America brief. Fatma, take it away.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, my name is Fatma Tawfi, and I'm Represent Women International Research Manager. Last week, we released the 6th installments in our country brief series, the North American Brief. Through this series, we have shown the role that system plays in shaping opportunities for women in politics. In the North American Brief, we narrowly focus on systems and outcomes in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. As you know, Represent Women is committed to identifying best practices for advancing women's political representation. Our international research is foundational to this mission because it helps show that major systematic change is possible and that we have the power to create systems that supports women at all levels of government. While the United States, Mexico, and Canada all exceeded global average in women representation, Mexico stands as a world leader, ranking 4th internationally for women representation in its lower house. Importantly, Mexico's innovative parity in everything system has directly contributed to high levels of women representation and the election of its first women president, and is the sole country in the region that had reached gender parity in the legislature. Meanwhile, Canada and the United States lag behind in all of these fronts and fare comparatively worse in the legislature, with global ranking of 69th and 79th respectively, meaning that the US ranks behind all of its allies except for Japan. Over the last 20 years, the intentional changes made in Mexico and the adoption of gender quotas have led to positive increase in women representation at all of the levels of government. By comparison, winner-take-all voting in the United States and Canada have systematically hindered women's opportunities in politics. There is a lack of investments in system changes at the local, state, and national levels to ensure women can run, win, serve, and lead their communities in Canada, and even less investments in the United States. As you heard yesterday and will continue to hear today, we already have better models for innovation at the state and local level within the United States, where ranked choice voting have been used in over 50 jurisdictions, including Maine and Alaska at the state level to increase women representation in politics. I will now pass the mic back to Tamaya Dennard, who will introduce our first set of speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatma. I appreciate that. It is such a pleasure to work with such brilliant people, and I'm so blessed to do this work. Our first session today is about voting rights on the state level. And you know, all of us know that voting is the cornerstone of any democracy. To discuss in even greater detail about the preservation of voting rights on the state level, please allow me to introduce our stellar panelists. First is Rebecca Mears. Rebecca is the Director of Democracy in the Structural Reform and Governance Department at American Progress. Prior to joining American Progress, Mears was a political law attorney at Elias Law Group and Perkins Cole, where she specialized in campaign finance, voting rights, and election law on the federal, state, and local levels. Next, we have Candace Batiste. With her JD, Candace is a campaign strategist at the Legal Defense Fund. She led efforts to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of Connecticut, which is the strongest voter protection law in the United States, and leads to state voting rights for the work done with the Legal Defense Fund in the South. And lastly, we have Erica Pearsman. Erica is a senior advisor at Promote the Vote Michigan. She is an attorney, a voting rights advocate, and elections expert who has worked for advancing ballot access and fighting voter suppression in Michigan for more than 2 decades. Welcome to all three of you. And with that, I will pass the mic to you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the first discussion of the day on state voting rights acts, which you'll often hear us call SVRAs or state VRAs, just so we don't jumble our words a lot. To give you a little bit of an introduction before we turn to some questions about the nitty-gritty, state voting rights acts are currently the law in 7 states, California, Connecticut, New York, Oregon, Virginia, Washington, and most recently Minnesota. So there's still a lot of room to grow. And state voting rights acts can take many forms, but generally policymakers and advocates use it to describe a category of laws designed to protect voters of color from discriminatory voting policies. Accordingly, state VRAs often contain protections similar to those of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965, but they're not merely copies of the Federal Voting Rights Act. They can also offer enhanced protections, such as reducing the burden on communities of color to bring vote dilution claims, and can be very important in this day and age to help plug holes that the courts have carved into the Federal Voting Rights Act. So without further ado, I'll get into our first topic of discussion, which is, what is a state VRA? I gave a little bit of an overview, but Erica, I would love if you can give a little more in depth.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. I think one of the important things about a state VRA is to recognize that the federal courts have been chipping away at the federal VRA for a very long time now. And I think we're going to see more of that in the coming months and years. And what the state VRAs do is they give the state courts the ability to stop that. So the state courts the state VRAs are completely separate from that. So they allow the states to have their own laws that can be enforced separately from the state VRAs. That's a very important thing. And then, as you said, they can protect specific communities. And although the Michigan State Voting Rights Act did not make it across the finish line last year, we hope that will happen in future years. We had some provisions in there that were very specific to issues that we had identified in Michigan that we wanted to address. And you can do that with these state voting rights acts. The Federal Voting Rights Act is a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't address specific issues that you have in any individual state. But with the State Voting Rights Act, you can craft it to address a specific issue. So for example, we had noticed in Michigan that there were a lot of groups that were not being, whose groups that spoke languages that were not being addressed by the Federal Voting Rights Act. Specifically, we have a very large Arabic-speaking community in Michigan that wasn't covered by the Federal Voting Rights Act, but also a lot of other language minority groups. So you can address that in a state voting rights act. We also have issues with the disabled community that just, we have the federal laws, but they aren't necessarily always enforced at the local level. So things like that I think can really be addressed by state voting rights acts that just aren't addressed by the federal laws.
Absolutely critical. And Candace, I'd like to turn to you and take a step back. Candace, what brings you to this work with state voting rights acts, and how have you gotten involved, and why are they important?
So I got involved because I understood that federal protections are only going to set the floor, not necessarily the ceiling. And because I am so interested in how the state voting rights acts can affect the Deep South, where I'm from. So it's very personal for me. I'm originally from Louisiana, and we are definitely seeing voting rights being chipped away at every level. And so I'm here because I'd like to see more states actually step up. And I noticed that there are some that are doing that better than others. And I just am here because I want to help them be more proactive rather than reactive. And because I understand that the local solutions matter. When state VRAs succeed, it's because they are built in partnership with the communities they're meant to serve. And when that's done right, you don't just create better policy, you create a stronger, more representative democracy.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Beautifully put. And Erica, I know that you brought up language access and disability access, so I might just jump in here to point out another important provision found in many state VRAs, which is pre-clearance. Pre-clearance is a program that we used to have at the federal level, and it said that states and jurisdictions that had a history of discriminating against people in voting and election laws, if they wanted to change a law, they actually had to submit that law to the federal government so they could review it and make sure it wasn't actually going to discriminate against people. And that was before it went into effect. So what happened in 2013 is the United States Supreme Court said that the formula which determined which states and jurisdictions fell under preclearance was no longer allowed. They didn't actually get rid of preclearance, but because they struck the formula, preclearance itself stopped work. It no longer really exists at the federal level. And so state voting rights acts have actually started to adopt their own preclearance provisions to protect voters. So with that little addition and note, I would love to know if there are other key provisions that should be included in a state voting rights act to really ensure comprehensive voter protection and access to the ballot. Erica, I'll go to you because your mic is on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of provisions in our bills that were drafted in Michigan. We had a very interesting provision that would have created a state level data center. Michigan is somewhat unusual in that we conduct our elections at the city and township level. We administer our elections at the city and township level. So all the data is at the city and township level. So if you want to get data, you have to go to each of 1,520 cities and townships. Those are, do all of those FOIA requests. I think some states call them open records requests. I mean, it's really a pain. And so this data center would have aggregated all the data in one place, and it would be available to everyone free of charge, which would not only make it easier for people who wanted to gain access to that data, but it would also create information that would enhance public policy decisions, because data makes for better public policy decisions. So that is an important provision, I think, for state level voting rights acts. There's so many things that you can put into these state level acts. I think as the Legal Defense Fund is finding, I think that as these acts get done in more and more states, you can take the provisions that are working in one state and then look at how they're working, see what's working, what's not working, and then, adapt them for other states. Candace can probably speak to that. She might have seen how that's working.
Yeah, Erica, in addition to the transparency and the public data collection, which is sometimes referred to as the centralized database, I have 4 other provisions that I have not just seen work in other states, but that I think just should be included as a bare minimum. There's, of course, the clear legal standard for challenging the discrimination so that it's easier and not harder for communities to be able to fight back against suppression. The pre-clearance provisions that you talked about earlier, Erica, those language access protections for those voters who don't speak English fluently so that they aren't shut out of the process. And then one that can be seen as a bit controversial, but what I've heard from community multiple times is the restoration of voting rights for formerly incarcerated people. And in states where it's relevant, ensuring that their temporary sentence doesn't really mean that it has to be a lifetime of political exclusion. And so, as both a lawyer and an organizer, I like to stress that it's not just about what's in the bill, but who was in the room when it was written, when it was created. And if we're going to draft policy without listening to the people who are impacted, we're not really creating democracy, we're just rearranging power. And so we want to make sure that we aren't being gatekeepers, but that we are actually leading in what democracy should look like.
That goes to the next question I had, which was, how do these acts contribute to greater equity in the democratic process? Candace, I don't know if you have other aspects on that to add, or Erica too. I'm thinking here potentially about vote dilution and how state VRAs can remedy that.
Yeah, so one thing that I usually hear about is how the VRAs should be increasing voter turnout, especially amongst historically underrepresented groups. And these acts are able to contribute to greater equity in the democratic process. And that's true. But I would say that it's not just about the personal responsibility of the voters, it's about systemic access. And so as it relates to turnout, state VRAs do a really good job of removing those barriers. For example, when you expand language access, you require early voting options or you prevent discriminatory redistricting. You're creating a system where people are not just allowed to participate, but they're empowered to do it. But I also think that, especially when I hear about turnout, we may be asking the wrong question there, because the real goal here is, at least for me, it's not just to get the people to vote, it's to make sure that when they do vote, their voices actually matter. And that means breaking down these systemic suppressions before it happens and not just encouraging participation within a broken system.
Yeah, I think if you look at the litigation that has been brought under the state voting rights acts that have been passed in recent years, a lot of it, almost all of it, I think, relates to representation of residents of cities and towns on the governing bodies of those cities and towns. And that's really important because people want to see that they are represented at the very local levels of government. And I think, you know, so much of our public dialogue is focused on, you know, presidential elections, the very top. But, you know, a lot of what really affects people is the very local levels of government. You know, what happens with your trash pickup? What happens with, you know, the things that affect us on a day-to-day level? And people want to know that their city councils or, you know, whatever they're called, look like them. And that's what state voting rights acts can really affect. And I think it's really important that we make sure that those bodies look like the populations of the communities, and these acts can really help that.
Yeah, to add to that, I want to say that so there's a concept known as vote dilution, which a lot of which state VRAs address. It's sort of the heart of a state VRA, which are election practices or procedures which drown out language minorities or racial minorities so that they don't have a voice or representation in government. And there are a few ways that can be done. And, you know, while I am in a room with Represent Women, I would be remiss not to mention that ranked choice voting can actually serve as a potential remedy to some of these issues at the local level. And state VRAs can allow individuals to actually challenge vote dilutive city councils, school boards, local election structures that are not structured to give them a voice or power. And adopt a better method so that everyone has a more equitable voice. So just a little shout out to ranked choice voting there on that. And as we start to wrap up a little and get some questions in the Q&A box, I wanted to ask you, Erica and Candace, what is one piece of advice you would give to those who are advocating for stronger voting rights protections at the state level, and what actions should they prioritize?
Well, I would say it's very important to put together coalitions. We had a lot of opposition to our state level Voting Rights Act from our clerks, our local clerks, and I think partly it was because they weren't involved from the very beginning. And there's a whole history to that, which I'm not going to get into. But, you know, I think it's important to involve all of the parties that are going to be affected by this. And of course, the people that administer your elections are going to be affected. But we had involved you know, various democracy advocates. We had elected officials. We had municipal associations. I mean, we had a whole lot of stakeholders. And there were a lot of meetings and there were a lot of negotiations, and you might as well get people involved from the very beginning. And get everybody seated at the table to have the discussions so that you can figure out what the issues are and figure out how you can satisfy people's concerns.
Yeah, I think Erica said it perfectly. And so I'm just going to reiterate. I'd first start off by saying, stop waiting for permission, especially when it comes to the coalition building aspect. You can start that now. If you want to pass a strong state VRA, prioritize the coalition building from day one. Don't just assume that people will show up when you need them, bring them in early. talk to the people who will be implementing it, talk to the people it will impact, and build a relationship before the crisis. Things are already really hard enough, and we don't want to make them harder. And so we don't want to continue drafting policies in silos and making the same mistakes or alienating communities and wondering why democracy is backsliding. We can choose to do what's right, and that's building that lasting people-powered solution. And so I would say my call to action, if you will, is if you are running for office or you are drafting legislation, ensure that the people you claim to represent are in the room, because that's not a high bar. I think it's the bare minimum. And question if you are uncomfortable having those people around you, because we should remember that we are not here to be saviors, but to be public servants. And our job, again, is to strengthen democracy and not undermine it.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I was going to say, beautifully said again. So we have just about 4 more minutes in our little session. And so I wanted to turn to some of the questions we got in. I'll address, we got 2 questions about the SAVE Act, and I'll take this one on, and anyone else is free to add to it. But I would encourage you to read the Center for American Progress, has some great reports on how detrimental the SAVE Act could be. These specific questions are asking, you know, if a state VRA could protect against attacks like this. I would say that it's a little different when you're dealing with federal law that determines eligibility of voting versus how state VRAs kind of are about the structure of local state elections and ensuring more equitable access. State VRAs are great when there are court challenges that undermine current federal laws that protect voters. But for the SAVE Act, I would say that the biggest thing is you know, focusing on not passing detrimental federal legislation in the first place. So if you'd love to learn more, I would selfishly direct you to CAP's website, where we talk a lot about the SAVE Act. Erica and Candace, I don't know if you have any other thoughts to add on that front.
Just that the SAVE Act is a real problem. Yeah.
And someone asked Center for American Progress, just to answer that question. We got another one in about Colorado's state VRA. It seems that there was discussion about whether to include a proportional voting method in this Colorado VRA, and there was some kind of back and forth on that. So the question was, do we have advice on how to get coalitions to be a little more consistent across the board on state VRA policies?
I would say if you have them there from the beginning, you're able to usually go around some of the issues that happen when they come in the middle and say, well, actually, I don't agree with this, and I think we should have this. I'm very big on making sure that the right people, the people impacted, are not just at the table, but they're also the ones who are help setting the agenda, because then they have the buy-in from the very beginning, and a lot of this can be circumvented. I think that also it comes down to listening. I think sometimes we have policies that we want to pass because we saw they were successful in other states. But if we're talking about something like state VRAs and a tailor-made type of legislation, you have to make sure that the policy fits the people and not try to bring the people around to have them fit into the policy. So I think that's a way you get them to be consistent, is asking, will this help you? Will passing this policy actually have some type of tangible benefit for access to the ballot? And if the answer is yes, then the buy-in is there.
Yeah, I would just add that because these state level VRAs are so tailor-made for the states, they aren't necessarily going to be consistent across the board. Michigan already had passed through ballot proposals so many ballot access measures that wasn't really the focus of our VRA. So, you know, that wasn't what we were, wasn't the goal at all. So I just think that it's just going to be different depending on where you're starting out and where you want to go.
Makes a lot of sense. With that, I believe we're at time. So we're gonna get, hooked away to go hear some more brilliant speakers.
Oh my God, that was absolutely brilliant. I just want to stress that this is why DSS is so important. We just heard from three of the brightest legal minds in this country, and we had access to them, and you had access to ask questions. And not only are they brilliant, they lead with compassion, which is what we want in leaders and people who are voting, representing voting rights in this country. So thank you to that amazing panel. Rebecca did me a solid in that she kind of hinted around ranked choice voting, and that is what we'll be talking about in our next session. So we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll dive into ranked choice voting efforts on a state level, and look forward to that discussion. We'll see you after the break. Thank you all and welcome back. I'm just going to do a vibe check really fast because I want to see who's still with me. So if you could throw some emojis, some heart emojis up just so I can make sure we still have you. Okay, there we are. I just want to make sure I'm old school, so I just want to make sure that the people are still with me. So super excited about all the hearts, which means that you all are excited for our next panel. And continue the work needed to be done on a state level. Our second session is about removing barriers to office and enacting ranked choice voting. Our moderator for this panel is one of the country's fiercest champions of RCV, Minnesota's own Jean Massey. Jean is the executive director of Fair Vote Minnesota, and Jean is I would call her an electoral reform powerhouse. Her track record includes winning campaigns in Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis Park, Bloomington, and Minnetonka, Minnesota, all of which have helped create a statewide momentum around ranked choice voting. This panel includes some other powerhouses in the democracy reform movement as well. I'm excited to introduce Council Member Christina Henderson, who is an at-large member of the Council of the District of Columbia. As a trusted political advisor, Christina has counseled United States senators, DC council members, state and local education officials on an array of domestic policy issues which deeply impact children and families. Michelle Spark, who is the director of Get Out the Native Vote, which is a statewide nonpartisan voter education program under the Cook Inlet Tribal Council based in Anchorage, Alaska. Michelle has extensive experience as a legislative aide in Washington, D.C. and Juneau. And Brianna Goaz McGowan, who is the co-director of Delicious Democracy. Brianna is a developer, a poet, a data scientist, a modern dancer, and an advocate for equitable transformations to diseased power systems, and starting with passing ranked choice voting in DC and laying the ground for Black independent political power. And Katie Fahey, who's the executive director of The People, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization empowering everyday Americans from all political backgrounds to actively participate in creating a more responsive and accountable government. She also founded and led Voters, Not Politicians, a grassroots nonpartisan campaign that ran a successful effort to end gerrymandering in Michigan by amending the state constitution in 2018 with 61% of the vote. And lastly, but certainly not least, is Michelle Whitaker. Michelle is the executive director of Ranked Choice Voting Maryland, which is a grassroots coalition working to adopt RCV for local and statewide elections. Michelle is also a messaging and political strategist with over 15 years of experience in communication, advocacy outreach, and grassroots mobilization. Welcome to all of you. And with that, I will pass it to you, Jean. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Tamaya, for that introduction and introducing this incredible panel of women. I certainly drew the lucky straw getting to moderate with this incredible lineup of real advocates and real local leaders in their own space. And I also want to just give a big shout out to Represent Us in the conference that you're convening. It's really important that we're convening on all things democracy right now. You're doing a fabulous job, and it really matters who's telling the story, and that you can bring together women to help share the story about what is happening and what can happen. That's exactly what we need to do in this moment. So grateful for all of you for pulling this off, and we look forward to sharing these sessions with our audience back in Minnesota. So again, thank you. So thanks for the introduction of me. I'll just repeat that I'm the Executive Director at Fair Vote Minnesota, leading the efforts around ranked choice voting in Minnesota now for the better part of 18 years. And it has been my truest delight to see it grow all over the country with women who we're going to be speaking with today. And it's an important conversation. I think you teed it up well in your materials about the importance of how we're electing state legislative bodies right now, as Congress nearly fully retreats from its duties from legislating. It's critical that we have state legislative bodies that are not just doing that work, but are represented by the diversity of people in those states. So both at a state level and local level, the better we can elect who's representing us through reforms like ranked choice voting, the better. And we're going to need to continue to push this statewide in several states. So I'm excited to get the conversation going with all of you today. And I'm going to start with, I'm just going to jump right in, because we've got all these experts who can tell us what ranked choice voting is, why it's a great system, and where it's been and where it's going. So Michelle Whitaker, let's start with you. You're leading the efforts in Maryland. Thank you very much. That's exciting. Tell us why that matters to you, and maybe begin with helping the audience understand just exactly what ranked choice voting is.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be here with Eugene and this great panel of friends that I know from the DMV area and across the country. And I'll just start off saying, like, the why of ranked choice voting. And if you were part of the first day, you heard a little bit of that, because many of our panelists were talking about how the impact of ranked choice voting, on statewide campaigns, and how that really impacts candidates and women's representation. And I think when we look at our opportunities to vote and to really express our vote, that's where the why comes in. And I'll just share, I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. And in 2018, we had open seats for our 4 at-large seats on our county council. And we introduced public financing, which is a great tool that many of you may be familiar with, that allows for grassroots candidates to really run on a level playing field. And we had 33 candidates run for the 4 at-large seats. And these were some great candidates, and coming from different communities who were really interested in it. And I heard from many people who were like looking at the ballot and trying to make their choice among 33 and feeling really frustrated that they didn't have a way to really express their full vote, not only in that at-large race, but in all of the district races that we had in county executive. We had 8 to 10 people running. So again, you had that same problem of great candidates and not being able to fully express your vote. And that's the difference that ranked choice voting makes, in that you're not limited to just trying to pick one and hoping you're picking the right one that's going to win and get over the threshold and represent your community, but you can really express and say, here's my top choice, here's my next choice, and so on. And that really gets reflected in how it's tallied. And if your candidate isn't the winning candidate and falls onto the bottom, your voice still matters, because you get to have your backup choice considered. And that is what, like, people, when I explain it and I talk about that, and I give them, particularly in Maryland, that example of like, do you remember that election? And they're like, oh yeah, I really want ranked choice voting, makes sense. Let's do it, And that's what I think about. It's that personal experience of like, every voter wants to make sure that their voice matters. And that's what ranked choice voting does. And that's what we need to be a part of. So I hope that example was or explanation works, and happy to hear from our other panelists to how they explain ranked choice voting as well, and share kind of the why of it.
That's perfect. And before we leave Maryland, what's the status of the work right now? And what's your hope and timeline for getting it passed?
Yeah, so we have efforts at the state level and the local level in Maryland. So I'm currently in Annapolis, where we're working on 2 different bills that are for statewide presidential primaries to use ranked choice voting, as well as local enabling legislation for Montgomery County to be able to use ranked choice voting for local elections in that county. And so those are exciting efforts. We've got a lot of momentum around the enabling legislation, and we're just trying to hopefully get that over the finish line. And so I'll be here in Annapolis until I can get that, if I need to wrangle all of the legislators that I need to. But in addition to that, we have several cities who are really eager and looking at ranked choice voting, and that includes Annapolis, Hyattsville, Maryland, Rockville, Frederick. These are all great places with very diverse communities. And so we have really great opportunities to move ranked choice voting, not only at the city level, at the county level, but at the state level. And that's exciting that we have that momentum and can really move forward.
Oh, that's exciting. Michelle Spark, let's go to you next. You have been organizing to get out the native vote in Alaska, which actually uses ranked choice voting for its state and federal elections. You've had 2 election cycles now using ranked choice voting. Of course, the first famously electing Mary Peltola over Sarah Palin and Nick Begich. In the second cycle, Nick Begich won the congressional seat. We hope Mary Peltola is not done with her opportunity to run for office in Alaska. We hope to see her return. She's incredible, and I've had the opportunity to meet her as well. And she and others who are winning in Alaska really showcase the power of RCV to accelerate women in office, to really help moderate some of the political tone. And you've been able to elect a fairly cross-partisan legislature under ranked choice voting, as well, with the ability to really compromise and govern. Or at least that's the story that we're hearing out of Alaska. I'm curious what brought you personally to ranked choice voting, and what your experience has been in what the experience of RCV has been in Alaska, and particularly how the Native community has engaged in that process.
Yeah, Koyana Dailuti Winga Machoh. My name is Michelle, and Machoh is my Chipik name. I'm a member of the Kishinamate tribe of Chivak, Alaska. And what brought me to it was the fact that it was an election law, and I was the new director of Get Out the Native Vote. So part of our voter education was to go out to the community and teach people how to utilize ranked choice voting. There was a time where we were frantic enough and concerned about our elders and the language issues that maybe it would be overwhelming, but it proved out to be the theories and for the election integrity folks, thinking that it was a turnoff for the Native community or ESL community to have to rank their choices in order of preference. It was actually pretty user-friendly when it came down to it. So, Michelle mentioned 33 candidates for one race in Maryland. Well, we had 48 people running for Congressman Young's seat when he passed away. 4 of those were Alaska Natives. Now, that's not huge. If we were reflective of our demographic, we should have had 11 Alaska Native candidates running. But of those 4 that were running, 2 of them were in the top 5 vote getters category. So that was really remarkable for us to witness. Alaska is 43% BIPOC, but we're only 30% in the legislature. So obviously we have our work cut out for us on recruitment and of candidates to run for office of any caliber or serve on boards and commissions. But with RCV, we had that grace period to be able to use it for 2 cycles, and that for 1 cycle. And then in 2024, we had the repeal effort to go back to the 1 vote, 1 winner. And those are plurality winners. And we're talking about Alaska with 2/3 of it being roadless or off the road system. And we're dependent on planes to deliver our ballots and election equipment. And this is if weather is agreeable, you know. So there's a lot of issues that can happen, and there are systemic barriers to voting. So if we can successfully get a polling station set up in rural remote villages, like whether or not we have an election worker that's willing to work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and do the count outs at the end and phone it in to Juneau is sometimes questionable. And we've suffered with these systemic barriers and election workforce issues. So we need to make sure that we can, when we talk about election integrity in the Native community, we're just talking about literally being able to vote, just the mechanics of being able to vote. Other people, the critics of RCV, were saying that we couldn't understand it, and they were just defending our honor, so to speak. But we had 2,500 more people in Western Alaska and Arctic vote than we did in the special primary, because we only had 3 months lead time to set up that vote by mail experience. And then, so 2,500 more people voted by the special election and the statewide primary, and then 7,000 more people voted in the midterms than we did in the special election. So where was the turnoff? Where were we turned off or scared to go to the ballot box if we under this new election system? So we didn't see it, but I'm proud to say, or I should say, even though we're just a voter education group, we weren't telling people how to vote on a candidate or proposition. We defended the federally recognized tribes affiliated precincts in Alaska. We defended the new election law at 51%, which is literally the threshold anyway for that kind of thing. So that was our takeaway from 2024, is that we like this, we like the open primaries, we like being able to choose the level of candidate quality to be better representative of us.
Fabulous, and congratulations on pushing back on that repeal effort. We had such repeal efforts in Minnesota 2 times over, back-to-back years. And it's important that we continue to let people know that once people use ranked choice voting, they never want to give it up, because it's such a superior system. And one of the things that Congresswoman Peltola told us, I'll never forget it. She said, the only thing confusing to the Native community about ranked choice voting in the new system is that they couldn't rank in the primary. Right? Like, give us the chance to rank in the primary. So I just think it underscores the desire for voters to instinctively rank candidates. So thanks for highlighting that piece of it. Brianna, I'd like to talk with you next about the effort in Washington, D.C., a very exciting one, and your role in particular. You come out of an organization called Delicious Democracy, and kind of participated in the campaign in that way. Can you tell us a little bit about what the coalition to win ranked choice voting in DC was like, and why that made for a very successful campaign?
Hey everyone, good afternoon. So a couple of folks on this call were actually part of the movement that has laid the foundation for the ballot initiative. So it started as a grassroots coalition back in like 2020 around feelings of frustration, like, oh, we just say vote them out, but it's quite, we recognize that it's a lot harder than that when there's like an inertia with an incumbency. And we also recognize that the current system wasn't working. And so we collaborated and sought inspiration from others across the country as well. So it wasn't like, I think a lot of people thought, oh, we just came up with this new idea. It's been around for a very long time, and we sought the wisdom of other people who recognize the same thing in their own jurisdictions at a hyper-local level. And we took some of those wisdoms and molded them and made them work for DC. So one of the messaging that we honed in on was hold politicians accountable, make them work harder for your vote. There's a lot of different messaging that works for ranked choice voting in different areas. There's a through line in DC where that really took root and resonated with a lot of folks. And the coalition itself has certainly morphed over the years. So with Rank the Vote DC, what our grassroots coalition was back in 2020, 2021, that Michelle Whitaker helped cultivate, and we were able to reach. It was kind of like our testing ground. We were experimenting with, is this even something that people want in DC? Like, it's a cool idea to me, but that means we have to hit the streets and actually talk to people. And I also learned that people were all over the place ideologically. I thought that, oh, left, right, blah, blah, blah. And people are so much more complex. And so I recognized that it had to be grounded in things that connected to people's day-to-day. And so that kind of started the beginnings of the coalition, was not making it like a wonky poli-sci argument, but like, oh, plurality. It was more about like, if you value SNAP, if you value giving money to your libraries, if you value rent control, then we need to be able to elect people that would also value and prioritize that. And in DC, it's a Democratic stronghold. So we're not talking about Democrat versus Republican, really. We're talking about what type of Democrat do we want to represent us in DC. So that's kind of where the coalition started, was a bunch of folks also interested in more class-based issues. And so that's kind of the 2021 angle. And then when we realized that the bill, which Councilmember Henderson, who I'm sure will speak after, introduced the Voice Act for ranked choice voting, when it did not get out of committee, we realized that the better, I think, much more meaningful route would be through a ballot initiative where people will literally say and affirm themselves, I am ready for a change. And it passed overwhelmingly in November with 73% of the vote. But I do want to say that once we recognized going to a ballot initiative, I think we were inspired by the Alaska system, Final Four, with that primary reform. So we were like, let's go bananas. What can we do to shape this? Because once it becomes an initiative, it can be messed with, whatever. And so we're like, let's just go for what we want. And then, shoot for the stars. So we paired ranked choice voting with letting independents vote in the primary elections, because we recognized that, again, as people are all over the place ideologically, a lot of people who are independents in DC are disappointed or disillusioned by some of the things that the Democratic Party has taken on, but they're still fundamentally are appeal to things like rent control and other things that and voting rights and protecting our basic rights, basic liberties, basic civil liberties is like a kind of like good basis for that coalition. And so that's kind of how we grew it to beyond just the ranked choice voting, maybe more progressive folks, to actually be across ideological spectrum by bringing on that second piece. So that actually kind of like formed a really cool dynamic around like who's gonna join the coalition, who is tapped in, who's inspired. And I think that was a really, it was a strategic move on our part, because we knew that we wanted to go for really what we wanted. And actually what we wanted was Final Four, but we can't do that without a charter amendment. That's something the council has to do. So we kind of put together this thing that was as good as it's gonna get before Final Four, that we could do with a ballot initiative. And it was something to where I think we had to dance a little bit. There are certainly tensions in the coalition around like how to prioritize which communities to go to, whatever. And our North Star was who is going to be, I think, the most directly impacted, and that's going to be our neighbors east of the river and Ward 8. And that was my North Star on how to build a strong coalition, bringing in folks who have been historically disenfranchised, historically left out of the conversation. So I think when we kind of formed that steering committee of moving forward and getting that initiative on the ballot and then advocating for it. It was staying true to the message, hold politicians accountable, which appealed to a supermajority of folks in DC. And yeah, now it's in the process of hopefully being implemented by the FY26 elections.
Well, that's quite incredible. And everyone listening on the call today, I hope you're taking really good notes on what solid, good coalition building looks like. There's coalition building, and then there's really successful coalition building. And it seems like in DC, you've just surpassed all the other coalitions that have been done around ranked choice voting and took it to the next level. So thanks for improving the blueprint for how we actually pass these kinds of reforms. And welcome, Councilmember Henderson. We're excited to have you with us here today and to continue the conversation about ranked choice voting in DC. You've been a leader on the City Council advocating for this reform. You are the one who's really shepherded it through the process. And so I'm curious to know what's inspired you to play that role? Why do you believe in the benefits of ranked choice voting and how that impacts communities of color? And the path for, as a follow-up, kind of help us understand what the path is for implementing ranked choice voting in DC.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Brianna sort of covered a lot of the pieces here, but to answer your first question in terms of what inspired me, I think it's also important to mention that in the district right now, we also have public financing of campaigns. And so when we implemented the Fair Elections Program, which is our match program, just by sheer nature of us removing the barrier of financial entry for folks to run, our elections became way more competitive than they used to be, because now you don't need, to know someone who can write a $10,000 check in order for you to be competitive. But if you're able to be very good in terms of your grassroots messaging and your grassroots fundraising, then, you can be competitive, you can be viable, if you will. So when I ran in 2020, I was running for an at-large seat, and an at-large seat in the district is actually a you pick two. So it already is kind of like a ranked, it's like a mini ranked, because it's the top two vote getters are the ones who are moving forward in terms of winning the election. When I ran in 2020 during a pandemic, there were also changes that were made because there is no way that anyone would able to get 5,000 signatures to get on the ballot during the height of the pandemic, where you couldn't gather in large places. There was frankly, the biggest gathering place was the grocery store, or the line rather, to get into the grocery store. If we remember those days, and it's hard to believe that was only 5 years ago, where, there were a limited number of people who can go into any place at one time. What that led to is, for my particular race, with the lowering thresholds of the amount of signatures that you had, plus public financing of campaigns, you had 24 people who were running. And this was like the first time that we've seen sort of the combination of both things in a very, very competitive race. And it was just incredibly frustrating to people, which I think is a little bit of what Michelle talked about in Maryland, and Michelle talking about in Alaska, where it was like, folks feeling like they're not able to really vote their conscience because there's just too many individuals that are on the ballot, and that ranking is an opportunity for them to truly express their preferences without discouraging competition across the board. And so, when folks ask me around, why are you backing ranked choice voting? You won your race. And I was like, yeah, but I won my race with 15% of the vote. While I feel like I'm an excellent council member and probably one of the best in the body, don't tell my rest of my colleagues, but I do feel like 50% plus one is an important piece in terms of feeling as though you have a mandate. And we've seen it time and again. We have a special election that is about to happen here in the district. I think there are already 13 people who are running. 13 people in a special election for a specific ward election. That means that somebody is going to win, probably with less than 10% of the vote. And I feel like that is not representative of what the entire population and electorate desired. And so I introduced the Voice Act. We weren't successful in getting it out of committee. the coalition decided we're going to take the referendum route, and so they did. And now it's back over on our side now that it was voted on by the residents. Now it has to be funded, and so that's a debate we're going to have with my colleagues as we come up for the budget process next month. But, you know, as Bree sort of mentioned, the fault lines on this particular initiative are not very clear, even amongst those who might consider themselves to be progressive. For some colleagues, they're like, yeah, ranked choice voting, but no, open primaries. And I'm like, okay. Or vice versa in both ways. And, you know, just for folks to know, I am a registered independent. So I was all in on Initiative 83 because I benefit from it all together. I get to vote and, you know, on the whole nine. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that story and for your tremendous leadership. It's always the case in these local initiatives that if there isn't some level of elected support for these initiatives, it's so much harder to pass, if not impossible. So your leadership truly mattered. I'm going to go next to you, Katie. Thanks for joining our conversation today. People know you as a citizen organizer who famously brought redistricting reform to Michigan with a Facebook post. I'd like to take on gerrymandering in Michigan. If you're interested in doing this as well, please let me know. And the rest was history, and it's made out of you a real advocate for what everyday citizens can do in our democracy. So thank you for setting that example. And of course, you haven't settled with just doing that. You've continued your advocacy, and now you're leading an organization called The People. And in your spare time, you help around ranked choice voting in Michigan, and you're on the board of Rank the Vote. So you're spreading your expertise around the country. My question to you, Katie, is what's your spark? And why have you dedicated yourself to the cause of American democracy?
Ooh, that's a great question. And yes, I wanted to, if you are looking for how to get connected in general to ranked choice voting really quick, I would not be a good board member without saying go visit rankthevote.us. We are running a 2026 ballot initiative in Michigan to get statewide ranked choice voting. So rankmivote.org is a great place to go. We can definitely take donations from across the country. So if you're looking to make a difference, we've got areas for you to do that. You know, I think ranked choice voting, I found out about it because one of our volunteers, once we amended the Constitution of Michigan to end gerrymandering, was really excited about it. And he was like, I'm going to go and try and now get ranked choice voting implemented, because he was really frustrated with the type of candidate. So I had kind of known about it, but not really, but started to kind of listen into what they were saying. And it was really powerful because we know that there's a lot of systemic aspects to our government that just do not work, that do not let voters actually play the appropriate check and balance role we are supposed to play. It doesn't allow us to elect the people we actually want to elect, or unelect people, even more importantly, people that we don't want in office, who aren't serving us, who aren't delivering on results. And there's a lot of folks who are really frustrated and want common sense solutions being focused on and passed, yet where there is alignment between parties, those tend to be the issues that can get you primaried, can then make you unelectable because you might want to compromise with somebody from a different party. I mean, there's so many ways that we could be improving our democracy. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about activism, and why I hope everybody who's listening is already knows what campaigns that you're passionate about right now, but is when you can start coming together in community, you start recognizing all those similarities we do have and all of the shared concerns we have for our democracy. And it is also contagious. So that's why when we saw that in Michigan, we were able to end gerrymandering, we actually had 17 people decide to run for local office. We actually had 4 different campaigns pop up from people who are volunteers as part of that, because they started to recognize that it is actually possible to make these changes. And if you live in a state that has a statewide ballot initiative process, you can try to do that, like in Alaska, and actually pass ranked choice voting at the state level. But also at the community level, most cities have some kind of ability for citizens to use the ballot initiative process as well, where you can decide to bring this cause up. Or, of course, trying to talk to your elected officials and tell them how and why this is important and can benefit you in the community can really be impactful too. But I think that the possibility of change and realizing that we can be the designers of our own political system and improve it, I think is what continues to motivate me. There are so many millions of Americans who desperately care about the issues going on in the world. They just often have no idea where to start. What can actually change this system? How do I make this problem not feel so insurmountable? And ranked choice voting is a solution that doesn't fix everything, but is a heck of a start for actually fundamentally shifting power in our political system so that voters can actually have a say. And so I think that's what's so exciting and why I've remained passionate about this, because we should be celebrating when there are new diverse ideas and more candidates running for office who are desperate to represent us. We should not be talking about how we need less of them running because it might ruin the chances of someone else winning, or an interest you like even less winning. And I think that fundamentally for me continues to make it feel like this is of urgent importance, that we can start shifting how we talk about politics and how you win our vote as Americans who have real power in those votes.
Well said, Katie. And in fact, it tees us up well for the first question. So we've got just a few minutes left of our time for a couple of questions in the Q&A box. And I'm not surprised to see the first question coming out to be, why are states banning it? This person is writing from Ohio, where they have a ban bill. We have a ban bill in Minnesota. There's one in Iowa going through. They're all over the place. And of course, Alaska. Thank you again for defending against banning it in Alaska and repealing it. So I think the key question there is like the arguments that they make would be cost, confusion. They have their 3 C's, right? So what was some effective messaging on your part in Alaska to defend against those arguments?
I think for the start of it is explaining what closed primaries were from before, because that's how disengaged the average Alaskan voter was to that process, is that they didn't know that parties were given the keys by the state to run their own conventions to choose their candidates that the rest of us were going to end up voting on. So once we explained the difference between closed primaries and open primaries, they realized that that concept was not very democratic, in fact, and that now we got to be the shapers of what a ballot could look like. So a lot of light bulbs went off over people's heads when we explained the differences between those two.
Right. Well, thank you. And of course, we're getting quite honed on our messages against opposition arguments because they're so common now. So everyone working to promote ranked choice voting is well armed, and we've got through Fair Vote and through Rank the Vote and other organizations, everyone on the ground, lots of good talking points if you are really wanting to become familiar with how to push back on these very baseless arguments. So thanks for sharing.
I wanted to just add to that even in Maryland, we had, while it wasn't a full ban effort, there was, on some legislation, there was an effort to put in specific language to say ranked choice voting couldn't be a solution to other issues like a remedy to the Voting Rights Act. And I am part of Ranked Choice Voting Maryland is part of the Maryland Democracy Table, and we had a discussion about that, and I was very clear with people. I was like, we can't do that. We're doing that when it's happening in other states. We need to defend and say that we're not going to support any type of language that restricts the use of it. And to Bree's point about coalition building, it was really heartening that, or warming for me, that I knew that our members of the coalition stood up and said, we're going to make sure that that language doesn't get in the bill as we're continuing to move forward. So it wasn't me that had to directly defend that. It was our other coalition members who were present and working on that as well. And we're able to talk to the legislator and make sure that we didn't have that language in there. So again, like, we can all play a role in making sure that those efforts don't move forward. And in most cases, like in Alaska and other places, the motivation is because the system actually worked. It worked the way it was supposed to. It elected somebody who was representative of the community. It wasn't the person that the political party or the whatever power wanted. And so then they were like, well, we're going to get rid of it. And that is not how democracy should work. And so we should always use those examples to say, defend democracy, not people who are trying to hold on to power.
Yep. Exactly. And let's just make sure moving forward that the RCV wins way outpace any efforts to ban it and repeal it around the country, because it is so powerful in its impact. We're at our closing time. If you've asked a question in the Q&A box, feel free to ask that directly of any of the panelists or to me or to Represent Women. We will respond to you. Some good questions there that we sadly, unfortunately, just don't have time to respond to. So I want to once more thank all of the panelists. Can we give everyone a big round of applause? Yes, it was a great conversation. We learned a whole lot. I continue to learn something new every day from all the new advocates doing ranked choice voting and getting initiatives started at the local level and at the state level. It's very powerful, and we're also grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for an amazing panel. Thank you, Jean, for facilitating a brilliant conversation. One of the things that I'm most excited about that last session was how they made ranked choice voting seem more accessible. So if you're interested in learning more about ranked choice voting, I would encourage you to go to our website, which is representwomen.org, Google it, or go to any of the organization websites here represented today so that you can learn a little bit more about it, because I really think once you learn about it, you'll understand what we already know, and that is it's an amazing tool to get more women elected to office. We're going to take another 1 minute break, and when we come back, our next panel is going to tell us not to just wait our turn, which we hear a lot in politics, but they're going to talk about how we can move forward and make the change that we want to see. So we'll take a break, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back. As we know, we talked about this a bit on day one. Actually, Aaron Velarde from Vote Run Lead went into this in great detail, but we understand that most legislative body rules were written a long time ago, and they didn't have me or you in mind. And what we do know is that you can have the best and the brightest women to run for office, but if you're not being inclusive, which means making sure that systems allow people to bring their full selves to elected office, they won't be successful. The last session we have today is all about modernizing the state legislature and what that actually means. Our moderator is the powerful, knowledgeable, and kind, which is my favorite thing about her, kind Celinda Lake. And I'm going to say kind because she doesn't know me, but every time I've emailed this woman, as busy as she is, as a big deal that she is, she always emails me back, and she's never met me. So I say kind because she's powerful and kind. So thank you, Ms. Lake. Having Ms. Lake here with us is a big deal. She is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women and any candidates, but she specializes with women candidates and actually framing issues to women voters. There is a rumor, a nasty rumor, Ms. Lake, that they call you a super strategist. And if you have seen her or read anything about her track record certainly backs that up. So joining Ms. Lake will be an amazing panel. I'm going to introduce the panel really quickly. Sarah Haig, who I work with a lot, who's really amazing. She's the Chief Program Officer for Vote Mama. She oversees the organization's advocacy and research initiatives to build the political power of moms. Before joining Vote Mama, Sarah was the local Chief of Staff to the chair of the House Oversight Committee, and she was one of the nation's youngest at the time. Layla Sedain, who is president and CEO of Future Caucus, which is an amazing organization, is building a healthier and more curious political culture by activating more than 1,900 Gen Z, shout out to Gen Z, millennial elected officials across the nation and across the political spectrum. Before Future Caucus, Layla launched the initiatives at Generation Progress, which includes the It's On Us campaign against against campus sexual assault, and the Higher Ed Not Debt Coalition to make higher education accessible and affordable. And last but certainly not least, one of my colleagues whom I love, Marvelous Mize, is one of Represent Women's own U.S. research managers, and she is brilliant. I can't wait for you all to hear from Marvelous has a degree from Columbia University. It's actually a Master's of Arts in Human Rights. At Represent Women, Marvelous leads our Black Women in Politics research. She authored the first installment of the brief entitled Breaking Barriers for Black Women Candidates, and is currently working on a follow-up examining online violence, harassment, and intimidation. I know you all have heard of fashion drip. I mean, all of you are dripping. I can see you on the cameras, y'all are dripping, but we got something right now called Brilliance Drip. This panel is very much giving Brilliance Drip. So welcome to our speakers. And with that, I am turning it over to you, Ms. Lake. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's such a privilege to be here. And thank you for that introduction. That's wonderful. And Tamaya, I have been watching some of the summit and I loved the panel that we just saw about experts, many of whom I've had the great privilege to work with about changing electoral systems. But I am very excited about this panel to look into, once we get there, how the systems need to change and change to be truly inclusive. We have been involved in, and you have some of the best organizations here on this list. We have been involved in several research studies of women's candidacies and women of color and people of color in general, and LGBTQ. And we worked for the two youngest women in Congress. We worked for in the California State Legislature, a woman who delivered not one, not two, but 3 triplets when she was in office. And all of these are really, really challenges, and a number of candidates who have responsibilities for taking care of not just children, but aging parents as well. One of the barriers, a couple of the barriers that I hope we'll address in this workshop is fundraising and the networks that women have. Women often have a lot of grassroots support, but they don't necessarily have the big law firms or whatever supporting them. Separation from family. We found as a separate variable in one study we did, simply the distance from the state legislature to the person's home was a major factor in whether they could run. Childcare and family care in general. Only 30 states explicitly allow people to use campaign funds for childcare. That is, even when it's allowed, that is often raised as a negative in a campaign. Only 7.9% of legislators are women, are moms with children under 18. And this is a lot of the work that Vote Mama has done, which is an organization I just adore. So there are a lot of barriers, and caregiving goes far beyond the children. It goes to parents and other family members. And often we found that it is the single woman who runs for office, at least in the initial races, not the mothers, or although single moms, not single moms and not married women. But then it is the single women that often have to bow out because the other ones pick to take care of mom or grandma or the aunt because they quote unquote don't have families, which is a whole nother conversation. Parenting, childcare accessibility, safety, and then now the online abuse that women get, and women get it more, and women of color get it more. So there are just so many barriers, and they're getting, it seems, worse, not better. So I'm very excited to have this panel. So the first question I want to ask is, we heard about the structural changes. We've heard about a little bit about I want to talk about the problems. I want to then talk about the solutions and where we go from here to leverage solutions. So across all of you, what specific barriers exist in state legislatures that make it difficult for women, mothers, younger people to serve, people of color? And how do these barriers impact the diversity of perspectives in lawmaking? And Sarah, maybe we'll start with you, since you have done so many studies in this area.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been so great to work with you, Celinda. In my previous role as Chief of Staff, we crossed paths many times, and it's so great to see you again here. So one of the major factors that we hear from the moms that we work with in state legislatures, you hit the nail on the head: childcare, security, and how do I make ends meet? What job am I supposed to have in a state legislature that's going to allow me to take a few months off or have the flexibility to be able to travel to the Capitol and back? And then once they're there, they're on 2 childcare wait lists, right? One in district and one in the Capitol. So our work at Vote Mama has focused on identifying the barriers that moms of minors face when running for and serving in office and breaking those down one by one. Some of the most compelling solutions that we have found to make state legislatures sustainable places to serve for moms of minors is, of course, increasing legislator pay, but importantly, allowing for proxy voting, allowing for legislators to vote by proxy, virtual participation, paid family leave for legislators. There's only one state, Colorado, that allows state legislators a formalized paid leave option. And that bill was brought up by Representative Brittany Pedersen of Colorado, who gave birth while serving in the Colorado state legislature, didn't have options for ways to participate after she gave birth. And now she's running a bipartisan proxy voting bill in Congress that we've gotten a lot of traction for, which is really exciting. I would also say that childcare and security are 2 of the main things when both running for and serving in office. And that is why Vote Mama is dedicated to allowing state candidates to use their campaign funds on childcare expenses. We're up to 39 states that allow that usage. Alaska was our most recent just this year. And of those, 15 states allow candidates to use their campaign funds on broader dependent care. To your point, Linda, of those 54% of Americans that are in the sandwich generation, it's really important that candidates be able to use their campaign funds to cover their expenses for childcare for their minor children or caregiver services for an aging parent or an adult child with disability at home, because we know those perspectives are missing from our decision-making tables. And if we had them in the rooms, our policies for caregivers would actually meet the needs of American families. And of those 39 states, 14 allow candidates to use their funds on official duties, not just campaign duties. So if there's a late night vote at the Capitol, they can use their campaign funds to cover a babysitter so that they can stay and serve their constituents while not having to pay out of pocket for those costs. We're expanding that playbook to also allow candidates to use their campaign funds to cover security expenditures that come as a result of running for or serving in office. This is particularly salient for moms with young kids at home, because the threats that they're receiving are not just targeting them, they're targeting their families. They're targeting their kids. So if we want to achieve gender parity, we have to make it easier for moms to run for and serve in office, and we have to make sure that they're safe to do so.
Thank you, Sarah. Leila, I want to turn it to you because we also work for the youngest male member of Congress, who some of you may have seen last night responding. And these are this new generation of dads, and there's a dad's caucus now in Congress. They want to be different kinds of dads than their fathers and grandfathers, not dissing their fathers or grandfathers. But tell us about including younger people and what some of the solutions are from your perspective and some of the barriers.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just thanks for having me. And I need to have Tamaya come around with me and hype me up before everything I do. That was a great intro. Listen, I got into this work, into politics, into the democracy space, because I felt like I wanted to be a part of solving problems and making things better. And most of these elected leaders who run for office, especially at the state level, do it because of that, because they see a problem in their community that they want to solve. And it's not until they get there, once they do all of the hard work of, convincing people that they're the right person,
winning, they step foot in that state legislature and then they realize how hard it is, or how hard it is going to be for them to stay. And so I also want us to think about, like, as we think about recruitment and how to make it easier for people to run for office, like, how do we keep them there so that we're not sort of seeing this attrition so quickly of, and in particular, women, young people, people of color, folks who, when these institutions were designed a really long time ago, were not at the forefront of how do we make it work for sort of different lived experiences. And so, yeah, I really want to plus one everything that Sarah said about some of the barriers that I think apply both to women, young men, in terms of it's really hard to have a career as a state lawmaker and actually make ends meet, right? The unpredictable or the state session scheduling means that for a lot of states, you're going to have to juggle another job, and finding an employer who's going to want to sort of support that. An employee, think about your own bosses, like an employee that's gone for at least 3 months a year, and then that's not to mention any of the sort of other times that they're going to need to be in the legislature and constituent services. That's really hard. If you've got family demands, and as you mentioned, Celinda, this is true for moms and dads who want to spend time with their kids, have aging parents. It actually doesn't really matter what it is that they're trying to do on their personal time. They should be free to have some personal time. This is a really tough job, and something like proxy voting or remote voting would be one solution to that. I'll also add sort of this bill in Congress that Congresswoman Peterson has that's bipartisan, became bipartisan because of a young dad who wanted to co-sign with her. And so I do think sort of young people are stepping up to really reimagine what our institutions look like to serve a more modern, a more modern leader. A couple other things that I would just mention that we've heard from our lawmakers as we work with them across the country. You imagine state legislatures as like full of tons of staff and resources and people to help get the job done. No, right. In places like Georgia, there's one staff member for every 8 legislators. So now that's compounding the difficulty of, if the lawmaker is not there in person, that's going to impact your district. That's going to impact your constituents. And again, this people ran because they really want to serve, but it just is squeezing people out. The legislative pay piece, I don't think that anyone wants these elected roles to be like millionaire jobs. Nobody's doing it for the money. Well, I should say most people are probably not doing it for that, at least immediate money. But state lawmakers are making $20,000 less than the average American worker. And that kind of disparity just makes it unsustainable to serve if you don't already come from wealth, have a spouse who can support you. And that is ultimately contributing to not just a retention problem, but a chilling effect for people who see people not able to stick it out and think, well, how would I be any different? Why should I run in the first place? And so I think it's really important that as we think about how to make our legislatures sort of live up to, I think, a really beautiful founding ideal of citizen legislatures, right? Where people from all walks of life can step up, serve, and return to their communities. That's not really possible now. And so our legislatures are not reflective of the people that we're trying to serve. And so we need to, if we're going to get to parity, if we're going to have a more representative democracy, we absolutely need to have lots of different people, not just sort of vocal about some of the problems, but and maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit, but actually taking advantage of some of the solutions. And I think that'll be a really important thing to highlight, how these changes are not just to help, young people or women, but like this really helps everyone, and this helps deliver results that the American people are hungry, are starving for in this moment.
Thank you, Lila. Really good points. Marvelous, and what a wonderful name. I love that name, and you do marvelous work. I am know it, and you work for a marvelous organization. But I would love for you, particularly from your more systemic view, because I think Represent Us really looks at the connections, to talk about the barriers and then some of the solutions from your all's work.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, plus one, echo everything that's been said. The status quo doesn't really uplift women candidates and elected officials who are mothers or who have dependents, and those troubles are exacerbated when you're kind of like stratifying it by race. It becomes much, much worse, whether that's economically or just opportunities for engagement or opportunities for entry into the political sphere. And I think one of the most detrimental issues facing women in politics is that many state legislators are underpaid. And I'm going to go a little bit in on this. Layla did this, but I want to give a few more kind of like facts and figures because it's super telling. So for example, legislators in New Mexico are virtually unpaid and they only earn a per diem of $59 per day for the days that they're in session. So that's not even like a flat rate pay. And then most states offer legislators a salary that falls, like Layla said, below the state's median household income. And so if they're already coming from a marginalized community where they're making less, that's going to affect them and impact them so much more. And these inadequate pay limits or the inadequate pay limits the time that lawmakers can spend actually legislating and serving their constituents. Whereas higher paid legislators like those in the state that I live in, New York, which provides the highest pay, ironically, are less likely to miss votes. And, they're more likely to have time to devote to introducing new bills because they don't have to worry about supplementary dual employment or part-time employment to make up for lower wages. And we go more in depth into this. Two of my incredible colleagues on the research team, Courtney Lamandola, who's a research director, and my fellow research manager, Steph Scaglia, wrote an incredible report about, all of this where we examine it. I'm sure someone will link to it in the chat, but in there we also talk about how like low pay discourages diverse candidates, particularly women and people of color, someone like me who is intersecting that, as well as just economically diverse class candidates. So people from working class backgrounds from running for office. And low pay also discourages people who fit like other identifying groups, maybe they're LGBTQ or whatever. These are all compounding issues, and these financial constraints can disproportionately affect women who face more significant challenges in balancing legislative responsibilities with caregiving duties, as we've kind of discussed. We've seen through data this particularly affects Black and Latina and Hispanic women who earn less than other women on average. So this could obviously result in a less representative democracy, which is not what we stand for. We want representation. We want to represent women. So our really the impetus for our research is that higher pay, or the argument we posit is that higher pay can help to ensure women in marginalized communities can participate fully in governance, and moreover, competitive salaries are necessary to attract and retain qualified individuals who reflect the diversity of their communities. So legislators should be compensated fairly for their time and their expertise, and also just the demands of their job. It's really demanding work that they do at the state level. And if we don't kind of take care of them in this way, we are just going to end up with legislators who are independently wealthy and likely old and male and white, and they will continue to dominate the field. I don't know if anyone paid attention last fall to what happened in San Francisco with London Breed, but that's going to continue happening if we don't step in and take mitigating stances on this. And then very quickly, Sarah and I did have a meeting like 2 weeks ago. We got a tag team on this, and I'm currently writing a report right now. It's the second installment in my Black Women in Politics series, where we talk about, basically online violence and harassment that's facing Black women in politics. And I'll introduce you to terms like technology facilitated violence and cyber misogynoir, cyber racism. We're really going to get into the weeds. And my theory of change, I really modeled it based off of what Vote Mama has done. And so, it's kind of about how we address these rising threats, how we address security measures, the long-term solutions, what state legislators should also consider, whether providing additional resources for security, such as training and support services or bodyguards, or how we can do that, So looking forward to sharing that with you guys very soon. Very, very excited to introduce that into our dialogue moving forward. But yes, to get back to my point, sorry, my brain's like buzzing. Our solution that we kind of arrived at was compensations commissions, and I want to give it time to simmer. I want to go in and really talk about that later, because I'm assuming you're probably going to ask a question that will allow us to delve a little bit more deeply into solutions-based outcomes. But yeah, compensations commissions, I think, are something that are so essential, in addition with many other things that can help to sort of mitigate these issues about that are hindering women's representation and acting as a barrier.
Yeah, and actually my next question, because we already dealt a little bit with solutions, is how do we get here? And are there any success stories? And should we be using initiatives? And great questions that came in the chat, in the Q&A. How do we educate voters? Because one of the problems we have is, as a pollster, I can tell you in really applied races, if you're using campaign funds for childcare, if you're going to donors for personal expenses, if you're asking for higher salary as a legislator, these are things that campaigns will use against you. And it's really hard to win with these negative attacks. Or if you miss votes because your kids are sick. We've seen women just excoriated for this. So I'd love to hear you all talk about what are some of the solutions? How do we educate the public? What are some success stories? What are some vehicles like initiatives or other vehicles or compensation commissions that can get us where we want to go? So I don't know who would like to start. Layla, maybe start with you.
Sure. And you know what? I'm gonna let Marvelous talk more about the commissions, but I totally agree. I think sort of tactically, that's what we've seen work really well in a lot of the states that we've worked with. Very hard for a lawmaker to vote on increasing their own pay. And that's like a pretty good way to get them to not be a legislator anymore. So if we sort of think about ways to sort of create some cover and alternative ways tactically, I think those are some of the ways to do it. Or honestly, maybe quite quietly, because unfortunately, a lot of the polling shows that taking the empathetic view of lawmakers are people too is actually not the way to move public support, much as we try, and we are trying, because they are people too. And I just saw some lawmakers on the webinar today. So everybody here is a person who deserves respect and to live in a or to work at a supportive workplace. That's not going to move people. What I think needs to happen is, how do you draw a bright line between how having these individuals have the support, or at least the baseline conditions that they need to do their jobs that you elected them to do? How does that impact your life? How do you connect that back to the issues that you care about? And that's a pretty tough job. And so to me, I think that if what we're interested in is getting creating some cover for lawmakers, or creating sort of more public engagement around who are these leaders and what are they going to be doing with sort of these changes. I actually think it's really important to, again, sort of build the coalitions, both on the front end of who are the voices talking about that, but also who are the voices on the back end talking about what's possible when these conditions are met. Just a quick story. I don't know. Do folks here know about the curb cut effect, or what curb cuts are? It's like the little ramp on the side of a sidewalk that, if you're like rolling something, it's a little bit easier. And it was something that the disability rights community really advocated for wheelchair mobility. And turns out once those curb cuts were put in place, they were so welcomed by people pushing strollers, by people dragging luggage or, pushing carts. And I think that nobody thinks about it now as sort of necessarily an ADA sort of innovation. They think of it as something that they demand and they want. And it's actually like really annoying if you're walking on a sidewalk and you don't have that. So how do we apply that same methodology and framework of thinking to these reforms that seem like they're perhaps targeted at a niche population and improving them, but actually is good for everyone? And that to me is sort of the challenge.
Marvelous. Let's hear from you on the pay commissions and any other thoughts you have about how we get there.
Yeah, sure thing. First of all, Celinda, you're amazing. This is so cool to be. When you have like heroes and then there she is. Okay.
Well, you are all my heroes and you make the data come true. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So again, I want to kind of set the stage by reiterating that today's state legislators are full-time policymakers who require adequate resources to effectively represent their constituents. The complexity and volume of the work are not reflective in the outdated compensation models. So as I said earlier, a great option would be to utilize compensation commissions. And these are mechanisms that help depoliticize the process of setting legislative salaries by ensuring that pay is fair and competitive and reflective of the demands of the role. And, they're nothing new. They've existed since the 1900s. More than 22 states have them implemented in, one form or another. But right now there are currently 3 methods commonly used to set legislative pay. The first is relying on, the legislatures and the voters to determine legislator pay and compensation through bills and amendments and, other ballot initiatives, which is fine. But if there's worse than compensations commissions, because they make legislators, the perception is that, you can seem self-serving in the eyes of the constituents because it's like you're setting your own, you know what I mean? The optics are very, they're not the best optics. And so then that can hurt their chances of reelection, unfortunately. And then the second, is considering external factors like automatic adjustments, which it's kind of like a non-starter, that conversation. And the third is really compensation commissions. And we believe that having these great commissions allows for objective and fact-based decision-making regarding legislative pay. These commissions are empowered to create more transparent, fair, evidence-based compensation structures, and they ensure that legislators are properly compensated for their work. States that have implemented compensations commissions like California and New York have improvements in the diversity of their legislative bodies, with more women and more people from underrepresented communities running for office and winning, which is what we want at the end of the day. But of course, having them, it isn't enough, as with all things that we put forward in the work that we do, it's never enough. We also have to protect their sovereignty and the authority that these compensations commissions have. Because states that require legislation input or action about these commissions may be less likely to implement the changes. And, as with any kind of new idea you're putting forward, they're not the be and end all, as exemplified by their implementation in states like Pennsylvania, which has a very complex history of compensations commissions and actually didn't achieve the best outcomes. We won't get into that, but these are something that can, I think like looking forward, we can monitor how they work alongside other benefits like retirement packages, or even thinking about full-time versus part-time dual employment in legislatures. And then to answer the second half of your question, there's so many things that come to mind when the call to action or pulling the public in, giving them ownership and respecting their agency and their dignity in this process. And, the first is cultivating public trust, modernizing state legislatures through fair compensation, childcare support and security measures can help restore public trust in government by demonstrating a commitment to inclusivity and equity. And there's many ways that we can kind of leverage that all to create a more inclusive state legislatures. Four things come to mind. I think the first, at the kind of state level action, we can encourage states to establish independent compensation commissions, as they said, and to adopt policies that allow campaign funds to be used for child care and security. I'm going to touch a little bit on federal. I know it's not the federal day, but I think we can advocate for federal guidelines or incentives to encourage states to modernize their federal legislative practices. So it's really state legislators working with those at the top in Congress, and building coalitions that way. And of course, grassroots engagement, you guys kind of hinted at earlier, but just mobilizing constituents to demand changes. And last but not least, and we talk about this in the report that my colleagues authored, but just voter education. Polling from Common Cause New Mexico shows that most residents believe that their legislators are paid well, with a plurality estimating that they earn $75,000. They get like $50 a day that they work. It's not even close. So, the misconception creates a significant obstacle to raising the pay, and a compensation commission would take that issue out of the hands of both the lawmakers and the voters and put it into a third party body that would be able to, have autonomy and make fair judgments on this.
Fabulous. And I'm going to let Vote Mama and Sarah take us home. And I know you all always have such a great feel for the public. And some people in the chat also asked the question, how do we humanize state legislators? How do we get here? How do we move the public? So Sarah, I turn it to you for your what your knowledge and experience is, but also your speculation of where we should go from here.
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental misconception of the power state legislatures wield. A survey found that voters believe that state legislatures have 11% of the total power in the US compared to other levels of government, when in reality they wield 86% of the power to pass laws. For context, 27 bills got through both chambers of Congress in 2023. Over 19,000 bills were passed by state legislatures in the same year. And only 2% of state legislators are from working class backgrounds. And then we think about half of the 118th Congress being made up of former state legislators. We have a real representation problem and a real pipeline problem. And in both chambers, both levels of office, we don't have representation of everyday working class American families, right? Young, old, caregivers on both sides of the aisle. So thinking through, I know I've talked a lot about campaign funds for childcare and security. There's a few other models that I want to just lend my support to. One is Speaker Scott in Virginia just did a remarkable move in creating childcare stipends for delegates in the legislature, which is a wonderful way to ensure that caregivers have access to the funds that they need to be able to participate in votes and committee hearings without having to tap into their campaign funds to do so. The other is there's a bill moving in Georgia right now that would make the addresses of state legislators private, which is a really important step. And I don't think a lot of voters know that when you become a state legislator, a lot of your information becomes public. And we're seeing more and more threats towards our legislators. We really need to do what we can to keep them safe, both through legislative and administrative rule changes. I will finish us out with making sure that as we are talking about legislators, we saw a real anti-establishment mentality in this last election. I think that voters are feeling like they aren't represented, and giving our diverse representatives who are advocating on behalf of the needs of the everyday American, uplifting those voices and making sure that we as the organizations on this call are doing what we can to get those members into leadership and get them before microphones and cameras to be able to speak directly to the American public, to communicate what they are working on at the state level and how it impacts them, is going to be really fundamental if we want to simultaneously do the structural work that we're talking about right now.
Well, this has been an amazing panel, and I know we've got a few minutes over, but it's so worth it. Thank you for being so thoughtful, so constructive, and thank you, Represent Us, for putting this together. And I don't want to delay even a minute getting to one of my sheroes, Stacey Abrams. So Tamara, I turn it back to you. Tamaya, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much for that amazing panel. Or we like to call all men panels manels. And I would just say that based on what we just saw, a manel could never. So shout out to all of you ladies. An amazing, amazing panel. It is my pleasure to now introduce our keynote speaker for today. It is the incomparable Stacey Abrams. Stacey formerly served in the Georgia House of Representatives. She's an attorney, a justice advocate, an author, and a podcast host. I stand Stacey Abrams, and I know you all do too. So the mic is yours, Ms. Abrams.
Thank you so much for a very generous introduction. Although I will take exception having to follow anything that Celinda Lake is in charge of. You guys might want to work on that next time, but it is such a joy to be with you. I was listening in on the conversation, and I'm just so grateful that you all are focusing on the importance of state work. I may have done a lot of things, but I think the most important work I've ever done was always at the state level. And sometimes people notice, as you might have heard yesterday at the State of the Union. Some people don't like the work we do, but I believe that when you do the work, it speaks for you. And the work that we can do for the people who do not believe we see them, that we care about them, that we can lift them up, is the most critical work. The attention that gets paid to the federal government is absolutely essential. I'm a daughter of the South. I grew up in Mississippi, came of age in Georgia, went to grad school in Texas. I was born in Wisconsin and went to law school in Connecticut, so I got lost a couple of times, but I'm Southern. And what I understand about being Southern is that the federal government has been vital in making certain that my rights were made real, that it was through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, through the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, through the 19th Amendment, but it has been the federal government that has anchored and substantiated my humanity and my citizenship. But it is at the state level that those things become manifest. It is at the state level that our rights become real, because the state serves as the intercessor between the intention of the federal government and the reality of the people we live with. And there are so many good people who want to do the right thing, but don't know that they have the right to believe in the right thing. They don't know that they have the ability to make right possible, and they don't know the mechanisms that exist to give their dreams reality. But when we sit in those state houses, when we work at the state level, we are their translators. We are their intercessors, and we are their advocates. The work that we can do at the state level makes real what mayors are trying to do at the local level and connects it to what the federal government demands of all of us as citizens, as residents, as people. And it takes our commitment to state level work to get good done. I ran for office for the first time in 2006. Prior to that, I was on what my mother refers to as a trajectory of downward economic mobility. I began as a tax attorney at a nice white shoe law firm, left that job to become the deputy city attorney for the city of Atlanta. And in my job at the city, I realized that there were so many people at the state level who were disconnected from the lived realities of the people I served when I was at the city. And so I decided to run for an open seat. I ran for that seat against not one, but two men. One who'd had the office and held the seat for almost 20 years before he'd been drawn out in redistricting and he wanted to come back. A second person who said he was entitled to the job because he'd grown up in that community. I hadn't lived there that long, but I knew what I knew and I knew what I could do. And so when I threw my hat into the ring to become the state legislator at the time for the 84th House District, I did something different than my colleagues. My opponents were going around telling stories about what they had done and what they would do. I would hold meetings and play Jeopardy, where I said, ask me anything you want to know about city government. Ask me anything you want to know about state government. Ask me anything you want to know about the federal government. And if I don't have the answer, I will find it for you and get it to you. And being in those spaces, instead of telling them about me, I asked them what they needed. I asked them what they wanted to know. I asked them, what could I do to help? And in asking that question, they became very clear that I wanted to go to office to stand with them, not in front of them, not behind them, but with them. And that was what I was called to do. I served in that role for 4 years until I decided that I should be the leader. When I stood for leader, it was at a time when my party had lost every statewide office. We were in a supermajority nearly in the Senate. We were only 3 votes away. In the House, we had a couple of votes to spare, but not by much more. And when I raised my hand, my colleagues looked at me and they said, you haven't been here very long. And what do you know about leading? And I said, look, I've been a minority for a very long time. I am really good at it. I am good at seeing what people need and understanding how to translate to those in power. I'm good at understanding the limits of our imagination cannot be met by saying that we aren't entitled to more. I knew how to take the pieces that were in the state code and link them to the imaginations of the people who simply wanted their trash picked up on time, their children to have good classrooms, who wanted healthcare and food and safety. They wanted economic security, educational opportunity, and they knew this was a shared responsibility. And as a state legislator, as the leader, I had the opportunity to offer that. Now, I wasn't confused. They called me minority leader. They give you the name leader because they want you to feel good about yourself, but they put minority in front of it so you never forget yourself. But I refuse to be limited by the limits of that title. I refuse to believe I wasn't capable of serving my constituents simply because I didn't have the votes, because it just meant I had to go look. I had to go find. I had to be more imaginative. And that is one of the jobs that you have when you are in the state. Your job is to imagine and then to figure out how to make reality meet what you can dream. Part of that work meant working with folks I didn't agree with. In fact, there was an environmental bill that came down during my first couple of years in office. Speaker of the House wanted the bill. The governor wanted the bill. The Chamber of Commerce wanted the bill. It flew through the Senate, carried by the lieutenant governors. I won't call them flunkies, but carried by his leadership. Flew through the Senate, came over to the House, and they knew it was going to pass because it had everything they wanted and they had all the power in the world. But I went and found the woman who led the Tea Party, and I invited her to lunch. And we sat at lunch and I said, look, you and I don't agree about much. We both believe in the Bible. You think mine's missing a few pages, but that's okay. We don't agree on environmental issues, but that's what this is. This is an environmental issue. And I'm not going to ask you to believe in climate change. I'm not going to ask you to believe that we have to do something now to protect our planet for years to come. But you do understand that there are property taxes, and you do believe in greed, and you know greed exists. And if we let them pass this bill, who do you think they're going to pass the cost on to? She looked at me and she said, well, I appreciate the fact that you're not going to try to convince me about climate change. I said, no, that's not my job. I said, but I need you to stand with me against this bill. And she did. And for 3 years, we blocked one of the top priorities of the most powerful men in the state of Georgia, because we understood that as women, we didn't have to be in agreement. We just had to be in alignment. And it was that alignment that helped me represent the people of my community, represent the state of Georgia, and it helped me lead even when I left the legislature. When I ran for governor in 2018 and again in 2022, there are those who question why I would keep asking for an office that no Black woman had ever held. And it's because I know the power of the state. I know the power of being able to expand Medicaid and feed hungry children. I know what it means to protect a woman's right to choose. I know what it could look like to have someone in that office who actually believes in the people in the state. And I do the work whether I have the title or not. And you have the titles, you have the power, and you have the purpose. We are in a difficult moment. We are being led by a charlatan who does not believe in the people he represents. We are being led by a man who will lie with impunity and get angry that you don't believe him. But we are also surrounded by women who understand that we can put aside our differences because what unites us can lift us. And in this moment, that is what matters the most. In this moment, it is our commitment to one another, our commitment to telling folks that we are there with them, that will change the course of this country. When I became leader, one job that I told each of my colleagues that we had, especially those who worked in my office, was when the phone rang and you picked it up, you did not transfer that call to someone else. My name is Abrams, so I got everybody's call. I was the first name they could find. And the young people who worked with me, I walked in one day and they were about to transfer a call, and I said, no, we don't transfer calls to someone else. If someone takes the time to find their state legislator, we find out what they need and we try to deliver. And I became known among Democrats and Republicans as the person who would always answer the call, because when they called my office, we didn't say hello, we said, how can I help? And fundamentally, that's who you are. That's who we are. That is why we stand for office. That is why we do this work. That is why we take on the low pay and the heavy criticism. It's why we don't sleep as well as we should, and we wake up way too early and go to bed way too late. But it's also why we know these are some of the most important jobs in this world. Because at a moment where they are trying to steal our future, the only place they can put that power is at the state level. Their intention is to devolve power from the federal government to the states, and we are going to be ready to take that power. And so I say to each of you, what we do in these next few days, in these next few weeks, in these next few years will set the course for the next generation. Yes, we have a Congress, and yes, we have a president, but we have state leaders who understand that every single day, everything we do can renew faith in our democracy, renew faith in our people, and renew faith in our future. We are the ones they see, and we must be the ones they trust. Because if we do that work, if we believe in our values, if we believe in our vision, and if we try our best every day to help those who need us to be there for them, then together, I promise you, we will win. Thank you so much.
You're the host.
Oh my goodness. That was exactly what we needed. Thank you so much, Ms. Abrams. It is quite an honor. Thank you for joining us for the second day of our Democracy Solutions Summit. And thank you for everything that you do for democracy.
My honor. You got to take care. Go to work.
Well, listen, I don't know if you all are fired up. I am definitely fired up. And I hope you all are feeling encouraged, not just by Ms. Abrams, but by this whole Democracy Solutions Summit. We've had some incredible leaders, and what we want to tell you is that you don't have to stop here. We want to encourage all of you, as my colleague earlier talked about, the Women's Power Collaborative. We do this every single month. This is not a one and done. This is just our chance to kind of coalesce all the women leaders that we have an opportunity to work with on a regular basis. So we encourage you to join the Women's Power Collaborative. The link is in the chat. We also want to invite you to answer our attendee survey. By doing so, you have an opportunity to win a $50 Visa gift card. I'm doing a lot of housekeeping, but I'm just like so stirred up and so inspired right now, because that's literally what I need to hear. If you are like me, kind of been down in the dumps about where democracy is, and Ms. Abrams brought it. So thank you so much again. With that, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our third day of the Democracy Solutions Summit. The focus tomorrow will be on solutions on the federal level. So day one was local, today was state, and tomorrow will be solutions on the federal level. We will go ahead and keep the webinar open, because I know there were a bunch of links dropped and things you want to maybe catch up on, because you were so mesmerized by the many amazing and brilliant women that we have before you today. So we'll keep it open for a few minutes. And we just appreciate all of you for joining us, and we'll see you back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again so much.